The skies above are filled with flyers of all descriptions, from the humble bat and raven to the majestic eagle to the mighty dragon. Diplomats hurry from clan leader to clan leader, spies lurk in the shadows taking notes, armies are very definitely on the march, and strange and unknown items of lore are slowly coming to light. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we catch up with all the latest events in part 2 of our Bane Wars campaign. Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today. In case you're new to the channel, Bane Wars is a campaign that we've been running for about a year now, a fantasy campaign, and the setting is we have 6 clans around an area known as the Bane, an area blighted by a magical war generations ago. Only now have the clans started coming back into the Bane to explore it. That was phase 1, exploration. All the clans coming in, finding out what was what, finding perhaps some strange locations, perhaps finding some gold, perhaps different items, various creatures, and of course, quite frequently finding each other as well, which led to alliances or battles or a mixture of the two. That's the exploration phase. We recently started phase 2, conquest. Now everyone knows where everyone is and what it's what. It's time to grab those resources that are available. Now, the clans will also have some other specific objectives as well. It might be to get a certain place and secure it. It might be to try and find a certain magical item or artifact, and so on. So while there is a big military element, there's also other factors to take into consideration as well. We're just up to turn 4 now. That represents a month in game turns. Each turn is 1 week. So I thought I'd bring you up to speed on the latest developments. Well, the ones that I'm aware of, at least, because what's happening with the diplomacy now is the clans, the characters, the players are contacting each other in various ways. There's a lot of talk and intrigue going on behind the scenes, which of course I'm not necessarily privy to, nor would I want to be. So that means that I can tell you a certain amount of what is going on, both from my personal knowledge, but also, of course, because we're ongoing at the moment, I don't want to reveal any state secrets or nefarious plans that might be being put into operation even as we speak. But I thought I'd start by showing you my latest purchases because, of course, I have to expand my army. I'll show you those figures in a moment. Then we'll take a look at the map to see the latest situation. I'll talk a little bit about what's going on. We've had some issues and questions arise as we go through because this was not all planned out in minute detail in advance, because that way lies madness, right? If you plan everything out in minute detail, but something takes a turn off, then you kind of got to scrap all that stuff you did and start again. So while the main framework of the game was in place, I left myself plenty of wiggle room and, you know, plenty of opportunity to work things on the fly as we go along. And that's what's happening. So I'll talk about that as well. And I'm also delighted to say I've had a great set of questions in from one of our viewers. So we'll finish by answering those. All right, let's start with the important stuff though, the shopping. Now, I think last time I showed you my latest purchases, which was the bulk of the new army, because each clan gets a new army to add to the, or what's left of the army from phase 1. And one thing I thought I needed to add into my vampire army were some humans. So I'm padding my forces out with some thralls for a couple of reasons. The first is, yeah, I've got lots of skeletons and zombies and that sort of stuff. They're okay as long as there's a necromancer around. If he goes, so do they. At least the humans have an element of being able to think for themselves. And, you know, they're not high level troops particularly, but you can get quite a lot of them for relatively few points. So they're very good padding for the army. The other slightly macabre reason as well for having human thralls is, well, you know, vampires do get a bit thirsty from time to time. So let's just leave that there, shall we? Anyway, that's pretty much all my army now, I think. I've got to get these painted. I'm going to undercoat them white this time. I'm trying out some more speed paints and different things. I really need to try and get these painted as quickly as I can because, as you will see in a moment, things are heating up. I think we're going to be in for a lot more battles this time. Let's take a look at the map then. Now, this isn't 100% accurate. It's a rough guide because what we've got here are the reports from those flying scouts I mentioned earlier, plus perhaps from some spies and scouts on the ground. So everyone knows roughly where the other armies are, but of course there's a lot of little details that might be missing. And if we start up north with the Orcs, Niels is playing the Orcs. Their main army has just crossed the river south of those villages at 3 and 4. So they're kind of encroaching on the Bear Clan territory a little bit. We also have another group of those who are away exploring across to the west. But I'm not going to say too much about those or what they might have found. The Bear Clan, played by Terry, they're holding that northern central area. Their sacred grounds and a fortress next to it. They're in quite a strong position. I think at the moment they're possibly readying themselves for some major conflict with the Orcs. That one is brewing up. I think we're going to get something happening there quite soon. If we come down to the southwest, the Fire Elves. Now, you may remember the Fire Elves were all over the map last time. They covered a huge amount of ground. Consequently, they have the most locations under their control, including that dwarven mining operation virtually in the middle of the Bane there. From there, they're starting to extend out a little to the east and maybe to the southeast as well. I'm not sure exactly why, but I guess we're going to find out quite soon. To the south now, we have Duncan playing the Dwarves. They're being fairly cautious at the moment. The Dwarves in Phase 1 did have a bit of a hard time. They were forced to retreat not only from that mining operation, but also from one of their major fortresses. So they're sort of recuperating, licking their wounds. They've built their conquest army up, and I think they're sort of testing the water at the moment before making any rash decisions. Over to the east, we have the High Elves, quite a mysterious group, played by Matt. Not much has been seen of them, not much has been heard of them, but they've had an army kind of suddenly appear on the edge of the map. No one's quite sure what is happening there or where they're going. And then to the northeast, we have my vampires. Their major army is heading southwards at quite a clip. They've obviously got an objective in mind. Again, at the moment, they don't seem to be minded to share what that objective might be with any of the other clans. So as you can see, these dots on the map, and there are plenty of other dots as well with the smaller forces, are gradually beginning to move together. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next month's play we're going to get our first battle. Might be a large skirmish, might be a full-scale battle, but I think we're going to see some action very soon. That then leads us to these issues that I said came up. Not really issues, but just tweaks and just things that needed a bit of clarification. I mentioned the flyers at the start, and these have been throughout the eyes and ears, or mostly the eyes, of each of the armies. Because this is a fantasy setting, so we can assume that magic users or druids and the like can communicate with their familiars, bats, ravens, crows, eagles. Certainly the dragon riders can communicate with their dragons, who are highly intelligent creatures. So these things are put up and out as part of aerial reconnaissance. As I mentioned before, if you've got a huge army moving even through the forest, they're quite easy to spot from the air. So each clan will be getting in a certain amount of knowledge, at least in their local area, in their quarter of the map, if you like, as to what is going on where. Now, as to how accurate that information is, depends a lot on the messenger, of course. A dragon, perhaps even an intelligent eagle, can say they've got cavalry, they've got 4 companies of archers, etc., etc. A bat or a raven is going to say big army. You know, so there's this issue. There's also the issue of if commanders want their flying scouts to go further or to go to a specific location, they can specify that in their orders. But of course, if they're going all the way across to the other side of the map, that's going to take some time. It could take a couple of turns for that information to come back, assuming, of course, that those little creatures do come back, because there are anti-flyer operations in progress as well. So that needed a little bit of clarification just recently. Another thing that came up was, well, what size is a large army, what size is a medium army, and so on. So the way we've structured that at the moment, using the Fantastic Battles points system, is if you've got a group of units that total 200, 300 points, then that is a small army. They can possibly be concealed if they're moving through forests, particularly if the commander says that they are to try and conceal themselves. Of course, that will slow their movement rate down a little bit, but they may be able to stay hidden. If we go up from there, 4, 5, 6, 700 points, that's a medium army. They can still move carefully, but they're much more difficult to conceal. Anything 800 points and above is a large army. You're not hiding that unless perhaps you've got some sort of magical thing going on. Who knows? Who knows what might be working? Outside of that, they're going to be spotted very easily from the air, as we mentioned before. So this then, of course, gives the players other options and other considerations. Do they want to keep their armies in 1 or 2 massive bodies of troops, and they're just going to go straight for something? They're going to plough through the Bane to their objective. Are they going to try and split up into smaller units? Perhaps they want to be more sneaky and try and infiltrate and get round flanks and attack enemies from the rear, that kind of thing. So it's another level of consideration to put into the game. I mentioned diplomats as well, and I'm pleased to say this time there's been an explosion in diplomacy. I think with the first campaign, it was new for all of us. The Bane was new. The armies were out exploring. In some cases, they didn't even really contact each other until, well into halfway during the game. That wasn't really the major objective. The main thing was to get this area explored. However, when they did, there was communication. But now we spent turn 0 solely on diplomacy, and messages have been flying backwards and forwards thick and fast. As I said, I have access to some of these because I'm involved as the vampire player. And originally I thought, well, I need to look at all of these so I can keep an overview of what's going on. But what has come up is that really does give me a huge advantage. I'll talk about that in a moment as well. So what we've decided now is, as GM, although I'm running an army as well, as GM, I only get access to the diplomatic messages that come to me or go from me. That makes more sense. However, I have said to the players I want them to save all those messages because I do want to see them at the end of the campaign. Because for me, part of the great enjoyment of this kind of thing is that aspect of intrigue that goes on, really building up that narrative. Now, as far as me being the GM and a player in the game as well, well, in fact, I'm running my own army and an NPC army. What I've done there to try and nullify any advantage that I have is to base decisions on dice rolls. So if a certain vampire force has the options to go this way and this way, perhaps this way to attack, this way to escape, then I'll resolve that with a dice roll. So it's taking my decision, my knowledge, hopefully, as much out of that procedure as I can. However, of course, once we get onto the tabletop, I'll take full control of my vampire army and drive my enemies before me in a sea of blood. Now, the other thing that's coming out again, which happened in phase 1 as well, is the players bringing their own elements of lore in. Of course, I had the main setup ready, this devastated area, a sort of post-apocalyptic area destroyed by magic. Nothing has grown there for centuries. Who knows what's lurking there and all the rest of it. But within that, even in part one, the players started forming their own objectives. So if we had halflings in it, for example, then that player might have come up with the idea of, I've got this magic ring and I need to take it over to this place. That sounds a bit familiar, doesn't it? So that was nice because it wasn't then incumbent on me to give everyone their objectives. And also the players came up with way better ideas than I could have thought up as well. So that's a win-win. And I'm pleased to say that has continued with, well, I can think of at least 3 things that have come up just in those first few turns that I can now layer in to the lore, and this narrative is starting to build up. We had the bare bones of it, but now with these other things coming in, I can start to shape the narrative. So this isn't, as I said before, just about defeating another army in a battle and then we do the next one, but having more subtle objectives, also discovering the secrets of the Bane. Now, if you know those secrets, can you use them? Do you want to use them? Is there a risk attached and all those other things? And of course, the primary aim is to become the dominant force on the map. So there's a lot potentially there to be discovered in the Bane lore that may help with that, or of course may hinder it. So let's finish by taking a look at the question that came in on YouTube. It's always great to get comments on YouTube, even if it's just a like or I enjoyed this, you know, it's nice to see. And of course, there's been some great suggestions come through on the various videos, both in terms of tips for creating terrain and painting, also ideas for rules and all sorts of stuff. So this came in a couple of days ago and it's from Mr. Now, I don't know if this is Cabman or CAB Man. I'm going to say Cabman for the moment. Mr. Cabman 1972. Just found your campaign and watched pretty much all the episodes. Seems very fun to me. I just recently found the Fantastic Battles rules and really want to start testing them with my friends. And a great campaign is something I wanted to do for a long while, and I'm not shy of making up my own rules. Well, I think you'll find the Fantastic Battles rules ideal for this. As I've said in the intro way back when we first started this up, I looked around at lots of different rules. We were looking at War Master for a while and various other things. Fantastic Battles works the best for us because, as we'll talk about in a moment, it really allows you to customize your armies, gives you a lot of leeway and allows for a lot of creativity. But also the gameplay works very nicely as well. Individual unit activation, everything is going to get activated. Everything is going to move in one way or another. Might not always be the way you planned it, but you know, that's war. And it gives you a nice sense of being in control of your army. But at the same time, there's those little things that can go wrong as well. So yes, really excellent rule set. Mr. Cabman continues. Question. You seem to be using the point system from the tactical game in the campaign to build the armies. In campaigns I have run, I have had separate point or resource systems for troops, as troops in campaigns are very differently valued than in a tactical system. I mean, you will use them very differently, and some are pretty useless strategically, such as a chariot or most heavy cavalry perhaps. Even a big dragon that only has a bigger impact in open battles. In a siege or when defending, you want to deploy cavalry dismounted, or even in some scenarios you rather dismount and fight on foot rather than on horseback, just like in real life. When playing in a campaign, I really like for players to be truly imaginative with their forces and often go with manpower, equipment, training and force structures rather than specific units. Characters and officers are, as you mentioned, very important to separate as well. Well, yes, I agree with that largely. I think we use the point system as we did really for ease of use. Everyone was familiar with the rules pretty much. It's a very easy point system to master. And from my perspective as a GM, it gets the armies up and running. It gets us going. Now, as we mentioned, with the Fantastic Battles rules, we have a lot of leeway. We can give units different traits and everything else. So that then becomes easy if we get to the tabletop situation, possibly to take that force that you've got and then say, okay, I just want to rejig this a little bit. So yeah, my cavalry are going to become heavy infantry. I want to mix these in with those. So yeah, that is perfectly doable. In fact, when we had the siege battles last time, we had a small siege at the Dwarven Mine, and then we had the Dwarven Fortress put under siege by the Fire Elves. We did exactly that. Cavalry units were put on foot. They're easily changed into infantry and so on and so on. So yes, I'd be interested to see in anyone else's approach, and if Mr. Cabman is going to set up a campaign, I hope he puts something up on video. I'd like to see how that's done. Always open to different ideas, of course. And he concludes, I also feel that in Fantastic Battles, you can potentially allow slightly different companies in the same unit to in battle. That would not be completely ahistorical to mix companies in the same units, or even mix companies with each other based on the terrain you deploy an army in, especially as the defender that probably had time to prepare the battlefield and positions in advance. Absolutely, yep. Which would produce more ad hoc armies, as we see in real life. Say a dwarf army would mix their warriors and crossbowmen in mixed companies. I'm sure that many warriors are cross-trained as well, so you could position more or less ranged units as needed based on the scenario. I really like for the players to be creative and not look too much on the point system to create balance. Do you take some of this into consideration in your campaign as well? Well, yes, I hope so, and I think you're quite right. I mentioned that siege thing before, you know, where you've got heavy cavalry in a siege, unless you're doing some sort of charge out to rescue someone or whatever, they're not riding their horses along the battlements, are they? So, yeah, to me, I think that's the way we approach it. I needed a point system to get everyone to create their army within a certain guideline, if you like. Otherwise, you know, I'm going to have 30 dragons, 5 Balrogs, and 5 million heavy cavalry. I'm sure no one would have said that, but you know, you have to give some parameter or guideline to the players. Generally speaking, I'm not a big fan of points in war games. I much prefer working by feel or a narrative approach. In fact, in my fantasy skirmish rules, I'm just writing, we want the gold. A couple of people asked me if there was going to be a point system in it, and I haven't put one in the main rules, but I feel maybe a little bit obligated. Perhaps I will put a point system in the appendices for people who like to use that approach. But with Fantastic Battles, as we said, I think you have that ability to, yeah, if you've got a crossbow unit and you've got a heavy infantry unit and you want to mix them together, then right, we can look at the stats for that. We just give that unit the missile trait or whatever it is. I certainly wouldn't insist that if a player had a force of heavy cavalry and the fight is taking place halfway up the side of a mountain, I wouldn't insist that they have to stay on their horses. They're not going to do that, right? It's just crazy. So they dismount, they become infantry, we adjust the stats accordingly, and off we go. Or as I said, this other idea of when we actually get to the tabletop, allowing for some sort of reorganization or reshifting of the forces. Because, as Mr. Cabman rightly pointed out, a historical commander has to work with what he's got. And knowing the ways that most big organizations work and bureaucracies and all the rest of it, what you have at the start, what is promised back at the factory, so to speak, is rarely what you end up with on the front line. So most commanders at some point, I would think, are forced to work with what they've got and improvise to their best abilities. And again, to me, that is great because that goes to the heart of this type of game, which is building the narrative. You get away from that sort of dry thing of I've got a 1200 point army and you've got a 1400 point and everything's nicely balanced and we play the game and there it is. Instead, you know, we had one in phase 1 with Orcs Drift, the beleaguered dwarves facing off against the orcs. I think they were outnumbered about 3-1 or something like that. So it allows for that kind of battle. And I know some gamers might not like playing like that. They want an even fight and everything else. But I think sometimes those battles where you have disparate forces or those desperate situations can produce some of the most memorable games. So thanks very much, Mr. Cabman, for that post. That was very interesting. That's given me a few things to think about as well. And I do hope you get your own campaign up and running. And I'd be very interested to see how you use the Fantastic Battles rules as well. I'm sure there'll be some good ideas that I can pinch. All right, that's it for now. Thanks again for joining me. As always, if you haven't already, please do like, share and subscribe. I'm pleased to say that we're almost up to 500 subscribers, which is my second milestone. So if we can hit 500 over the next couple of months, I'll be a happy man. Well, I'm going to be painting my vampire undead army soon. That makes me happy as well. You know what it's like. See you soon.